Good morning, everybody. I am here today with J.E. Harter, who is the author of The Butcher and the Bard, as well as an upcoming release, Red Lands and Black Flames. So we are going to be talking with her today about her author journey, this book, her upcoming release, and just some generally fun stuff. So J.E., thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
You're welcome. So let's just get right into it. So tell me a little bit about your path to being an author. When did it start? How did it start? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think growing up, I always loved writing, always loved it. It's always kind of been a part of who I am, but I actually am a theater kid. That was my original, that was what I originally thought I wanted to do with my life was
Mhm.
do Broadway and do movies. And that sort of changed, I think, at the end of high school, where I was experimenting with writing. I wrote an entire book, big fantasy book. It's always anything I write is almost always fantasy. That's my genre. But I don't know. There was something about that writing process that really stuck with me. And so all throughout college, all throughout my 20s, I was always dabbling with stories. Nothing that really stuck, though. Nothing that felt like it was worthy to go out there in the world. And it wasn't until I had the idea for The Butcher and the Bard that I really felt passionate about the project enough editing, share it with beta readers and all of that. And then based on that feedback, I felt very, very good about just getting it out into the world. And I never thought I was necessarily going to publish a book before, but once I got invested in this specific series, it was the only thing I wanted to do. And it still is. Like, I spend most of my day writing and putting off doing other things because I enjoy doing this so much.
That's awesome. That's really cool. I love theater. I used to do theater in high school, and I love
Mhm.
Broadway. We go to all the Broadway shows at like our local theater. So that's pretty cool how you kind of made that switch, into like being the
It's
one
both
to write it.
storytelling.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's both storytelling. So I just kind of switched from one form of storytelling to a different one.
cool, cool. Tell us a little bit about your writing process. So do you outline, plot and plan, or do you kind of just write whatever, whenever?
I do outline. Sometimes it's really specific. For book two, for example, which is right there behind me. Um, I had really detailed chapter by chapter outline. And that worked great. And it was really easy for me to translate that into a draft. For whatever reason, I'm currently writing book three right now.
Mhm.
And I do have that same outline. And and I have done, I think, more work in preparation to drafting book three than before. So I have my chapter by chapter outline, and I have like a save the cat structure worksheet that kind of, I plot it that way. I have another one that's a three-act structure worksheet that I've plotted that way. I almost think that now I'm over plotted, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. I've
Yeah.
over outlined to the point where it's kind of taking me a little bit of time to get back into the swing of writing and having the creative part of it. But now I feel like I've kind of hit a stride with it. And a lot of my first draft tends to be like the basics. It's like get to the plot, get to the main overarching story. I can't even really dig so deep yet into like character wants and everything because I feel like I just want to get the most basic version of this story down in draft one.
Mhm.
Draft two is always for me the most fun to write because that's when I get to go back and I add in all of the details and new scenes that I've come up with. Because a lot of the time I'll be like, oh, I should go and put that in, but I don't want to go backwards and
Mhm.
start editing again because that I think ruins the flow. And some authors I think feel that same way where it's better just to get the draft done, make the notes on the side to come back to something in your editing. And I'm really excited to finish draft one of this book and then get back into draft two and add all of the the special things, and the language too, which, is something that I love to play around with, in my particular writing style. That's stuff that I don't really get to work on until the second draft.
Mhm. Cool. Well, I'm excited to hear you writing book 3. Can't wait to read it. Um, and you're actually the second author who mentioned the save the cat thing to me, because I actually I've never heard of it. And I was talking to them about like how I'm trying to write a book, but like I don't really like know where to start. And they mentioned that. So that's interesting that you use that too.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't feel like there's a structure that necessarily works for me every time. I
Mhm.
feel like it's different each book that I come to. So for me, it's like experimenting with different structure plotting things to see what feels right for that particular project. But Save the Cat I'm actually reading the book, the Save the Cat writes a novel right now. Because that's also something that I care a lot about, is improving my writing skills. So in between, writing one book, I always tend to read a couple writing things like Stephen King, Bird by Bird. I've read all that stuff. So, I think it's important for authors to continue to improve their craft, particularly debut authors like me who are still kind of finding their way. I think it's really important to do that, at least for me.
And honestly, like it's shocking that like this is, like your first book because it was so good. Like
Thank you. Thank
no,
you.
really. And I know there's so much that goes into it, but it's very, very hard to get a 4 or a 5-star from me. Maybe I'm
Oh.
maybe I'm very like particular. Um,
Mhm.
it's really, really hard. And both of your books got 5 stars for me. So like that's saying something. Um,
Thank you.
and so you said that you mostly do write fantasy. So tell me what you enjoy most about writing in fantasy.
I just love the ability to start from scratch, that there are no rules. I mean, you get to make the rules. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to live with the real world expectations. And for me, I'm a huge fantasy reader. That's almost all the things that I read is fantasy. I just love the idea that there are so many possibilities. There are so many different things and worlds that you can create, and characters and creatures and magic and whatever. I mean, you have so much freedom to create. And I think that I don't know, there's just something really special, I think, about fantasy that feels brand new every single time,
Mm-hmm.
because every book that you open, somebody has created a totally unique world, and that's wonderful and beautiful, I think. Because I live in New York City, and I've read books based in New York City, and I'm like, yep, that's my real life. Yep, I understand that. But it's so, it's almost too relatable, where I feel like it's just life. And yes, that's great. And like regular standard fiction is wonderful. I just like the idea of something totally new and original, and creating it all right in that moment, and building a world and building a society, or rules with creatures, right? Because of course I have lots of different creatures or fairy tale things in my books, and it's really fun to think about how to recreate something too that has been done a lot. So I don't know. I think fantasy is the superior genre in my opinion.
Well, that's why I read it. I read it because, I want to escape and I want, to be somewhere that's not here, because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
sometimes real life can get a little stressful, and that's kind of what I appreciate about fantasy.
Mhm.
Um, what do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused? Like, and I ask this question because I have ADHD, so it's definitely difficult for me to kind of stay on task. I do, I did for 3 days, and then I'm gonna try to get back to it. Morning pages. So Julia Cameron, I tried to, write for 20 minutes, like before I started work in the morning. So what helps you focus and kind of get in your word count and get your goals?
I would say I don't know. I'm kind of the type of person where if I sit down to do something, I will do that thing.
Hmm.
I've always kind of been a very regimented type of person. I have my little to-do list always. I have a daily to-do list. And for me, as someone who's a little like obsessive compulsive, crossing off something on my to-do list brings me immense joy. Um,
Same for me.
so for me, it's like I've got to have that. First thing in the morning, I check my to-do list. I say, okay, let's prioritize. What am I going to do first? Whatever. And honestly, for me, writing tends to come first. It's like I get my emails out of the way first,
Mhm.
but then I get to settle in and I get to write. And I don't give myself a time limit or anything, and I don't give myself a word count. I just say, I'm going to write what feels good to me today. Take a break whenever. I always have water with me. That's really important. And I also always have a candle because I find it very soothing.
I
It
have one
just,
too. I have a
yep,
candle melter always, and I have
yes,
vanilla and patchouli right now, which is my favorite.
yep. There's something about writing with a candle. I don't know what it is. It's soothing. It's just like, it's a pretty smelly thing that's right there. Um, I do have two cats who are shockingly behaving right now, but a lot of the time they're not. And so it is quite distracting. And so trying to, for me, it's like I live and work in the same space as an author, and I don't have a separate office. So everything that I do is here at my kitchen table, and everything is all around me all the time. So just blocking out some of that, but also being okay with the fact that like interruptions happen and just being able to say, okay, put this on pause while I do whatever this other thing is. And some days are way easier than others, but I always, you know, have at least a little bit of a routine in there.
Good, good. Um, and what is your kryptonite as a writer?
Um, I don't know. For me, it's like sometimes my plans are too big
Mm,
for what I want to do, what really makes sense. And I think I kind of learned that lesson in Butcher and the Bard. Going back to like kind of the structure. Since it was my first novel, I do think the structure is a little different from the traditional sense that you kind of almost have two climaxes in The Butcher and the Bard. And for some people, that doesn't work. And for like traditionally published works, a lot of the time that doesn't work. But I kind of like to play around with structure. I feel like this is the story I want to tell. Do I care if the structure is off and if people think that it's off? That's kind of for me, I'm like, sometimes my ideas just are a little too big or a little too like against the grain. And thankfully, I have really great beta readers and a wonderful critique partner who kind of pulls me in and says, no, I really don't think you should do that. And I do listen to them for the most part, but I do think that sometimes I get carried away and just being like, this is how I want this story. This is it. This is the only thing that matters. This is what I've got in my brain. And then kind of bringing back to reality and being like, is this really going to translate into an actual story structure? Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't.
mm. Yeah, I think that, having like, beta readers and a good critique partner is really important, right? Because those are kind of like the foundational things. Like, you have usually a lot more, ARC readers than you do have beta or, and things like
Yes.
that. So it's good to kind of get a good foundation.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're gonna go and move on to talking about your book specifically. So we'll talk about The Butcher and the Bard, just because if someone doesn't know who you are, we
Yeah,
won't spoil anything for the second book.
right.
So if you had to describe The Butcher and the Bard in one sentence, what would that be?
I think the one that I've been going with is The Witcher meets Throne of Glass. I feel like that's probably the most consistent one that most people can identify when they read it. They're like, yeah, I see that. And it's very, I think it's very Witcher, more Witcher maybe than it is Throne of Glass, but that's my kind of like tagline right
I
there.
like it. I can definitely see that. Who is your favorite character to write and why?
I think it's consistent even now in book three. I love, and it's almost impossible for me to say one over the other, but I really love to write Mirai and I love to write Ruinen. I don't think there's a way to not love both of them when I'm writing, because I just feel like they're so opposite. Their perspectives on things are so opposite. Um, I think for me, Ruinen is the more identifiable character to me. I really relate to him, and all of the music analogies and things that I am able to put into his chapters are very much like that's a part of me. Music is a huge inspiration for me, and I love being able to incorporate that into his chapters. And then Mirai, for me, is so fun to write because I'm always pushing her, kind of like, I think recently I have been calling her sort of this like slightly unhinged, and I love to push that part of her of being, like such a complete badass, and like how far can I really push that, and how far can she really stand and take her revenge or like lead the way, whatever it is she's doing. um but I think it's really fun to play with her, and also the magic aspect with her is really fun to look at that and write that.
Awesome. I know that that's usually like a really hard question because like you love your characters obviously.
Right.
So it's hard to choose. It's like choosing like one child over another, or one cat
Yeah, it's
over another.
impossible. It's impossible. Although I will say writing Rhaegast has never been easy. I
Yeah.
hated writing his
Yes.
chapter. It's just so, the villain chapters, it's just so hard to get into their brain. And those tend to be the last things that I write, actually. Like I'll write all of Mariah Ruinen, and then Rhaegast I think about for a while, and then I come back to him. And it's not that I don't like him as a character, because he's, very, very interesting, and I tried to make him a layered villain, but just getting in his mind and how he sees the world is so different from me that it does kind of take a lot, a lot of I don't know, it just takes a lot of emotion from me.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Maybe
he's
that
he's
kind of
the
goes into the
hardest.
next question, which is what's the most challenging part of writing this
Yeah,
book in particular?
yeah. Yeah, it's just, he talk about Mirai being slightly unhinged. Rhaegast is very unhinged
Yes.
as a character. But for me, I also don't want it to just be like, here's a crazy guy, here's the bad guy. What is going on in his brain? What is making him this way? And that's kind of why I put the villain's POV in, which a lot of people kind of don't get to see. You don't, usually the villain is sort of like off and just this person that we talk about and we meet in the climax and whatever. I wanted him to have a story too. And yet he really was the hardest thing for me to write every time. I mean, he's just really different from me. And but I would say that the joy in there is also adding in Rhea into his chapters, even though we don't get her perspective. It's, I think that his interactions with her were some of the most fun parts, particularly in book two, for me to write.
Awesome. Awesome. And another hard question, what is your favorite line from the book? Do you have a favorite quote?
Um, I mean, okay. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna pull a quote from Redlands, actually, because it's consistently the quote most people are really identifying with, and it's the "I'm a nightmare," and when Mariah is saying that to Leaf. I won't say who Leaf is if you haven't read book two yet, which most people haven't. But Mariah, that quote about I am a nightmare, and I will not, I don't even remember it. Is that terrible? Is that terrible? I don't even remember
No,
what I wrote. I
no.
mean, it's literally, I'm like, my brain is on book 3, so I'm thinking about a quote
Right.
that I wrote the other day that I'm like, "Oh, I can't wait to share it with people, but I can't share it yet. It's too new." But like that in my brain right now, that's the quote that's going through my head that I really, really love. But this one, yeah, the nightmare quote in chapter 24. Defeat is not in my blood. That was it.
Yes,
Defeat is not in my blood. There you go. That's my favorite quote from
I
this
love
book.
that. I love that. And so we see a lot of like fan casting, a lot for characters and things like that. So if you were to fan cast your characters, who would play um it's Mirai, right? You said Mirai?
Yep.
To Mirai and
Um,
Runen.
I think with Mirai, to me, I'm almost like more based on appearance.
Hmm.
But Anya Taylor-Joy, just
Yeah.
like physically, she just looks so much like how I envisioned Mirai. And I think, honestly, I think she could kick butt playing Mirai. So, I mean, definitely her. Or, and I can't remember her name, but the girl who plays Ciri in The Witcher would be also, I think, physically, and also I think she could definitely play Mirai 100%. For Ruinen, I don't know. He's kind of like, you've got the side of him that's this musical side, and then you have this other side of him.
Hmm.
And um Nicholas Hoult always comes to my mind.
I love him.
I know, right? Like
I
I don't know
love
about his musicality aspect, but I just feel like his
it.
personality and his acting like reminds me a lot of like Ruinen's, playfulness and that comedic nature of him. And I will say this, when I was thinking about Ruinen, just like writing him in every way, the person that I've always sort of based him on with music is James Bay.
Mm.
That is who I like whenever I was describing Runin's voice or whatever, he was the person that I was thinking of. Um, and I know he's kind of like, I don't know if he's even mainstream as an artist. But that's kind of like if you could combine Nicholas Hoult and James Bay, I feel like that whatever that actor is, whoever that is, that's who I would cast as Ruinen.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, all right, perfect. So we're going to move on to the last part, which is just some kind of general, like fun questions.
Yeah.
So what do you like to do when you're not writing? Other than writing, what do you do with your life?
Well, obviously I read a lot. I think that makes better authors. I also I'm a youth theater director. That's technically my job. So
Awesome.
I do, even though I am not performing anymore, I am teaching kids and teenagers how to act and sing and dance. And it's quite a joyous thing. I really love it. And it's kind of my other passion because I do get to still be involved in musical theater, and yet I feel so much more purpose from teaching it than performing it myself. So a lot of my outside writing world consists of music and dance and theater and watching it, listening to it, participating it in any way that I can. And then, yeah, I mean, I live in New York City, so there's 1,000 things to do. There's 1,000 restaurants and places to go and see. So I am trying to be better about going out into the world and exploring. So we'll see. That's my 2024 goal right now.
Cool. Okay, so I'm gonna write these down because my last author interview, she gave me so many recommendations that were I literally read them all this week. I couldn't not read them and they were so good. So what are some books or authors that you would recommend? Like yeah, top 3 if you like.
Well, I feel like I'm gonna say the most generic names because, as a fantasy reader, they're the people that I'm reading a lot of, obviously. So you've got, Miss Sarah J. Maas, obviously, Stephanie Garber. I love N.K. Jemisin. She is brilliant.
NK or MJ? MK.
N
And
N N.K. Jemisin. Yeah, she is her Broken Earth trilogy. Literally, I think is what really propelled me to actually pursue
wow.
writing when I read that in my 20s. So a while ago at this point. But um she's, I don't know, her way with words I love. And then Laini Taylor.
Yes.
I think she's a very underrated author. People don't really talk about her a lot, but like her books are just beautiful. The Daughter of Smoke
Yes.
and Bone trilogy is one of my all-time favorite book series I've ever read, and I have read that since the day it was published,
Mhm.
um, a long time ago at this point. And I don't know, I just feel like she's really underrated and creates such unique worlds and characters. And I just can't wait until she publishes a new book. Like I'm waiting and waiting.
It's been a while, right?
But I think, it has been a very long time since Muse of Nightmares, I think was the
Yeah.
last thing she published.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can, whenever she decides to publish again, I'm there for it.
Mhm. Awesome. Awesome. Um, so if you could share some advice for an aspiring author, advice would you give to them or to your younger self?
Um, I would say just write. Write the story that's in your heart. Don't care about the end result of it.
Hmm.
Write it and get it done. Because once you get it done, I feel like for me, it was always like swapping between projects and never truly finishing one. I encourage you to stick with a project for as long as you can, unless it truly feels like you need to abandon it. Try it, see what happens. At the end, you might be so surprised by what you've come up with. That's how I felt about The Butcher and the Bard. I just drove through and I said, okay, I'm going to write this whole thing. And I was really surprised at the end of realizing, like, oh, hey, this is actually a book. This is actually a story. And I would say 9 times out of 10, what you write is worthwhile,
Hmm.
even if it's not the thing that you publish right now. Maybe you go to a different story and you publish that. Always keep your writing. Don't throw anything out. And you can always come back to something, but try to finish the story because you might surprise yourself. And, I do obviously read lots of books in the genre that you like to write, but also outside the genre you like to write. And read some writing books. Do some of those worksheets because they may not work for everybody. They may, certain things will click with you in any situation, depending on the book or depending on you and your mood, but try them. See what happens. You may discover something new that you didn't think about before that really does help and improve your writing. Because as I said earlier, that's something that I care a lot about, is always making sure that the next book I write is better than the one that I did before, and making sure that I continue to grow as an author, almost in the same way that your characters do, that you see the growth at the end of the story, from me as well.
Awesome. I think that's really good advice because, my book idea, that I'm trying to work with, I had the idea in college and, I wasn't able to kind of, dedicate as much time as I wanted to it. And I just got stuck. And then ever
Mhm.
since, started reading books by indie authors and talking with them, like you, it's kind of like giving me like, just try again. Like like
Yeah,
try again. So it's like,
yeah.
okay, I'm able to like flesh out like what I want more, especially like you said, like reading other people's books and saying, okay, I like that. I like, that idea. But these are, this is my core, story. So it's,
Mhm.
great. Don't give up. That's good advice.
Yeah, there's always something good in what you write. Not the whole, maybe not the whole thing,
Right.
but there are always really good pieces within that story that you can, I believe it was Brandon Sanderson who said that, when he was writing Mistborn, he was pulling from multiple different story ideas that he had. He was like, okay, I'm going to combine this with this and this. And that's kind of how I feel. Like I don't throw away anything that I've ever written, except for like stuff I wrote in like middle school. That's not definitely not worth it. But even that book that I said I wrote in high school, I still think that there is good in there. It's not perfect, it's nowhere near ready, but there are elements of that book that came into Butcher, like Marai's character, that is very much a very similar character. And so even if that particular work doesn't make it out into the light of day, you can always pull great ideas from that to make an even better idea.
I love that. I just actually finished reading Miss Bourne. I'm part of the whole the original trilogy. I'm part of this book club. It's like fantasy for fast readers, and
Mhm.
we've read those, so that was
Yeah.
awesome. Um so I know that you said you love music and that's kind of your jam. So do you listen to music while you write, or do you have like a playlist for Butcher and the Bard? Like what, tell me about that.
Yeah. So I cannot listen to music that has lyrics when I write.
Mm-hmm.
I have to listen to soundtracks. So I tend to listen to like the Witcher soundtrack and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and Harry Potter soundtracks, like any of those fantasy movies and TV shows. I will listen to those soundtracks. And they oftentimes really help set the mood for a lot of things. Like the Lord of the Rings soundtrack was excellent for writing the second half of Red Lands and Black Flames for me. Um, but every once in a while, if there's a specific scene that I feel like a song can connect to, I will listen to that song on repeat and kind of get it in my body and everything and in my brain. And I sort of visualize like a movie trailer almost what the scene would look like with this song in. And a lot of the times that really does work, but I can't write and listen to lyrics at the same time because I will sing whatever song it is and not write, because that's just like if I hear a song and I know the lyrics, I'm gonna sing it. It's not possible. So I do love music, and it does heavily influence me in many, many ways. I do have a Butcher and the Bard playlist. It's not like actively out there in the world, but I recommend, if you want like really good Marai vibes, Jen Wigmore.
Mm.
She is my girl. Her stuff just reminds me so much of Marai, Written in the Water, Black Sheep, and Devil in Me are the three songs that I listened to constantly in Butcher and the Bard when I was writing Marai's character. Because I just feel like it's got that like strong, angsty girl power, but like slightly unhinged also. And yeah, so I can't remember any of the other songs necessarily, but just those three really stood out to me for Marai specifically.
Awesome. Cool. And have you ever traveled anywhere, when trying to figure out like settings for your books, or is there anywhere that you envision that you would like to travel that kind of reminds you of your books?
Yeah, l- I I mean, it's hard because it's fantasy.
Mhm.
But I will say Mont Saint Michel was the place that inspired
Oh,
Kelisar in this book.
I love
I
Michelle. I've
Yeah,
been there.
it's amazing, right? And so in my brain, I went there years ago. I would love to go back and kind of wander through again. But that particular place has always like lived with me as one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. So when you're reading this book and you're looking at Kelisar, the city of Kelisar, that's kind of what I was imagining roughly, because it's obviously we're not talking about water and the tides and everything. It's a little different, but that's sort of what I had in mind. But I would love to travel for writing and, go to some more places that I would love to utilize more. Obviously, like going to some of those Scottish castles would be amazing because, the Tacorn at Dualtanen, that castle was very much modeled after, those just really old gray stone castles that are a little bit dark. So I would love to see more of that. But finances, we'll see.
I know. Okay, so those are all of my questions, but is there anything else that I didn't ask or that you want to say about your wonderful, amazing book?
Well, I guess the first thing is this one is published, obviously, and available in ebook, paperback, hardcover. Check out the new Ingram Spark
I,
thing where
I
there
have
are
seen that.
it's fabulous for indie authors and readers in that you guys get it at a discounted price and we also get to keep those same royalties. That's fabulous and really helpful for us and for readers. And I'll also just say this book comes out in like a week and a half, which is scary, but also very exciting. And I'm doing a book signing in Philadelphia on the February 10th to celebrate the release of this book. So I'll be chilling there. So if you live near the Philly area, come say hello. I've never done a book signing event before. So this is a new experience for me. And I'm excited and also incredibly nervous about it because sometimes talking to people and being like, you should buy my book is
Feels
really
weird.
hard. It does. It feels like intrusive.
And like shooting your own horn, it's like, like buy
Yeah,
my book, right? Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And like I will say, do I believe that these are the best books that have ever been written in the fantasy genre? No, of course not. But I love the story. I love the characters. I'm really proud of them. And I just hope that people find um, the heart in the stories and connect to it the same way that I do when I'm writing.
Where is the book signing and what time?
It's at the Philadelphia Barnes and Noble at 1 p.m. on February 10th. There's only one Barnes and Noble in Philadelphia Center City, so it's kind of easy to find. And yeah, I'll be sitting there, I think, for like a good 3 hours and signing books and chatting and taking pictures if you want. Like I'm around. I'm just gonna be there happy and willing to talk about my book, but I will not give spoilers. That is one thing I'm giving a heads up right now. I will not answer questions about book 3.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I really, really appreciate it. And if you just want to stay on for a minute, uh,
Yeah,
we're going to end the recording now.
great. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.